Cell phone giant MTN is consulting its legal advisors following claims that it's violated the U.S. Anti-Terrorism Act. The mobile giant has denied the allegations. MTN was named in a U.S. lawsuit for allegedly making protection payments to the Taliban in Afghanistan. The company is among several multinationals named in court action on behalf of killed or wounded U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. MTN, along with 5 Western businesses, is accused of supporting the Taliban, acknowledged as the world's most deadly terror group, by paying them to protect their infrastructure. MTN Group and its wholly owned subsidiaries, MTN Dubai and MTN Afghanistan, are listed as defendants.
Picture this: South Africa, where load shedding is a lifestyle. The national dialogue costs a fortune, and our biggest telco, or telecoms company, has allegedly paid the Taliban while co-owning a network with Iran's military state. And now, surprise, a US grand jury wants answers. This isn't a PR headache. It's the kind of probe where the next stop is criminal charges, right? So what actually happened? Now, let me tell you, because this is a doozy. So on the 18th, which was yesterday, to the 19th of August, which is today, MTN disclosed it's under U.S. Department of Justice grand jury investigation over 2 flash points. Now, for context, its former Afghanistan operations, and it's a 49% stake in Cell, Iran's second largest operator. MTN says it's cooperating, right? Which means, translation, the DOJ, now a jury of America, is being shown evidence to decide whether to interdict. That's not civil litigation, that's just criminal. So the markets have noticed this, right? MTN's shares fell about 8 to 10% on the news, and a weaker SA outlook, the biggest single day drop in about 2 years for MTN, which obviously has affected the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, here comes the legal teeth. Let me give you a bit more context. So in US law material, support to terrorists is not a metaphor under 18 of the USC section 2339B, providing money, services, or even personnel to a designated foreign terrorist organization can mean up to 20 years per count, as well as life if deaths result. So corporate assets linked to the offense can be seized. Executives can face arrests and extradition. So the US Code Department of Justice, Congress.gov, took out a statement. You can check on their website. It says, if you think they never go after companies, consider Lafarge, which they went after, the French cement giant. In 2022, it pleaded guilty to conspiring to provide material support to ISIS and to al-Nusra, and paid $778 million. That was the first ever corporate material support protection precedented, right? So the Department of Justice in the US has noted that, and could also link MTN. And if you think sanction breaches are a slap on the wrist, ask BNP Paribas. The 8.8 to 9 billion in penalties in 2014 for illicit dealings with sanctioned regimes. And if you want to know where I found that information from, you can check The Guardian, the British newspaper. Now, here are the allegations. So the US plaintiffs, wounded vets and Gold Star families, allege MTN paid the Taliban protection money from the late 2000s. Imagine, through the US drawdown, keeping towers safe while funding the very militants killing Americans. You can't make this up. Lawsuits filed in 2021 to 2022 described a protection racket tied to Taliban-linked groups, including the Haqqani network rather, the Sparacino PLLC terrorism case +1. Now, the Iran cell, which has been there since 2006, MTN has held about 49% of Iran cell, 51% is controlled by Iranian state-linked entities. MTN stresses it hasn't extracted dividends since May 2018 due to US sanctions. But the ownership and the partnership itself are central to the DOJ's questions. MTN Group 10, secrets are there to see. Now, what's the US's angle, right? The IRGC, which helps dominate Iran's security state, is a US-designed FTO. So plaintiffs argue Iran-cell revenues feed IRGC-controlled ecosystems, ultimately tied to attacks on Americans and Israelis. The DOJ grand jury is exploring whether MTN's role crosses the material support line. That's the whole ball game, So Sparacino PLLC terrorism case is something that is going to be a ticking time bomb. Now, you'll ask me, how did we get here? So in the years 2005 to 2006, Iran's cell license is awarded to MTN. MTN becomes a 49% partner. Turkcell alleges bribery. South African litigation later finds MTN acquired the stake by lawful means, which, obviously I don't believe, but though, the geopolitical baggage never left. So in the year 2007, MTN launched in Afghanistan. At its peak, it reportedly captured 40% of the Taliban's, the 40% market share. And that is according to Data Center Dynamics. Now, in 2018, US reimposed sanctions or Iranian sanctions. MTN says it stopped extracting dividends from Iran cell, in that year. And then 2021 to 2022, the US lawsuits filed alleging Taliban payments and Iran cell links. So someone's got to be lying here. That is very clear. Now, from 2022 to 2025, MTN exits Afghanistan, selling the M1 group. The handover is completed in 2025 under the brand new Atoma, which is the great optics completed after the alleged protection fee. Right? So, Ecofin Agency Light, is also involved in these deals, as well as the grand jury probe goes public, The stocks have tumbled. That is very obvious to see. Now, there's been a bit of political backdrop. Now, let me explain what I mean. While MTN fires, SA's Army Chief General Ruzani pops up in Tehran praising ties exactly when South Africa is pleading for US tariff relief. It's like asking your boss for a raise while posting selfies with his worst enemy. So the optics are catastrophic. Al Jazeera has reported on this, including Africa Insider that it's not looking good for South Africa. Some outlets even claim Mcebisi Jonas, the MTN chair, and Ramaphosa's one-time pick as special envoy to the US faced US pushback tied to the probe. That's reported, not officially confirmed by Washington or MTN. So treat with caution, right? Just explaining. But it shows how toxic this looks in Washington. So, don't forget Jonas's persona non grata. But here's the kicker. MTN is financially strong right now, which is exactly why the DOJ's timing matters. So, the first quarter of 2025, MTN swings back to profit, heaps, about 645C from a 256C loss last year, with an EBITDA margin of 44%, service revenue at 105.1 billion rand, up from 23%, powered by data, which is about 36%, and fintech, which is at 37%, a customer base with 298 million data users, 164 million, telecoms users. That's big, right? But now the DOJ is threatening them with criminal exposure, possible sanctions, and risking financial freezes. So if you're a shareholder, let me explain to you. The Public Investment Corporation, the PIC, is the largest shareholder, right? With about 20%. Pensioners, teachers, nurses, the lot are indirectly holding this legal grenade. If sanctions or a guilty plea knock MTN out of US dollar channels, funding costs spike, counterpart ties walk, and your granny's pension feels it too. That's the honest truth. Now, here's the market reaction, right? So, about an 8 to 10% one-day share price hit on the DOJ news, plus softer SA outlook. That is investors pricing in legal sanctions and reputation at risk. So, the stock price for MTN has gone down in the last 2 days. So, what the grand jury really means. Now, let me explain that part if I didn't explain too much into depth. A grand jury isn't a press conference. It's secret, subpoena powered, and designed to decide indict or not. Outcomes range from no action, which MTN will be praying for, to deferred prosecution with a fat fine on monitors, as well as to indictments of the company, subsidiary, and potentially individuals. Once you're in the room, you're in Lafridge territory, which is criminal plea, potential huge penalties, and multi-year compliance monitors breathing down your neck. So the Department of Justice isn't playing. And I hope Mcebisi, because he's not in Washington, knows this. And you'll ask, why does Washington care? I'll tell you. Because Americans and Israelis were killed by groups like the Taliban and the IRGC-linked proxies. If DOJ believes corporate behavior greased those wheels, they'll reach outside US borders as they did with our BNP and Lafridge to protect Americans. That's bipartisan, and it has precedent. I'm just being honest. So, this is MTN's defense, because why not? MTN's line, we deny wrongdoing, we cooperate, and we haven't extracted Iran dividends since May 2018. Also, we've exited Afghanistan. Expect them to argue. We were following local laws. We faced extortion and we mitigated sanctions risk. That may play in a press release, in a US courtroom, dim the lights. Remember that story? The question is narrower. Did anything we did amount to material support? That is the question that the MTN Group telecommunications company needs to answer. Now, the boardroom is at risk. There's a criminal case, even without conviction, can trigger bank de-risking, counterparty exits, and supplier freezes. This is all possible. Sanctions exposure if Treasury OFAC joins the party, dollar clearing and international operations get choked. So personal liability, the directors, including the executives, face travel risks, arrest warrants, and extradition if named. The shareholder flight, please, if you can, consider the PIC's, investments there. There's a slight force to divest from the company. And South Africa's diplomacy is ever ready for a photo op with Iranian generals because that's the exhibit we like to share with Washington. So currently it looks like Pretoria's aligned with adversaries. That's what it looks like. Numbers that bring it home. Let me explain to you. The group scale is at 298 million subscribers for MTN. Data users are 164 million. I've said it before. The Momo users are about 63 million, plus 11 billion Momo transactions in the first quarter of this year. Transactions valued at 200 billion annualized, pace across markets. Disruption here hits households and SMMEs across South Africa. The ShareNet finance in Africa is going to be punished. Nigeria and Ghana are the profit engines right now, but US legal risk doesn't care where you earn, only what you did. That's what they care about. So to Mcebisi Jonas, well done, buddy. Truly, truly a hearty well done from 10 minutes with Kuhle. If you can't tell, I am being sarcastic. So when South African elites, murk that America can't police the world, remind them Lafridge paid $778 million US, not rands, not Zim dollars, and pled guilty. And that a grand jury means the Department of Justice thinks there's enough smoke to hunt for fire. If the case flips to indictments, MTN's yellow brand might start looking like yellow tape. So, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, this scandal is bigger than one company. It's a test of whether SA's boardrooms and politicians can keep cashing checks in Tehran and Kabul and then act shocked. Ramaphosa. They act shocked when Washington asks who paid for the bullets. For victims, families, this is about justice. For South Africans, your pensions and your reputations are at risk. It's about consequences. Please don't forget, you can sign up for membership. It's as cheap as 20 Rand. Should the PIC hold or dump MTN, and should SA fire generals who caught Tehran while asking the US for trade favors? Let's talk. Down in the comments. please do tell me what your thoughts are. As well as, if you like, you can buy me a coffee by sending a super message in the comments below. It helps and it goes a long, long way. Please let us subscribe. We really do need those subscriber numbers to go up. It is tedious making these videos, but it's important to get the truth out there. Till next time, love and peace. Love and peace.
MTN says it is cooperating with the U.S. Department of Justice and is voluntarily responding to requests for information. Diplomatic relations between South Africa and the U.S. have been tense, but the CEO, Ralph Popita, says the telecommunications company is not being accused of any wrongdoing and that they will update the market as appropriate on any material developments in the matter.
Our U.S. counsel was approached by the United States Department of Justice. We said we're willing to engage. They've asked for a request of information, and that request of information is really about two markets. That's really Afghanistan and Iran. And we've started a process of voluntarily engaging with them, and we're not being accused of any wrongdoing. And so this matter, as it develops, will update the market in the near future.
The group also reported an improvement in profitability in its half-year results. MTN headline earnings per share was R6.45 in the 6 months to 30 June, compared to a headline loss of R2.56 a year earlier. The company says the improvement in macroeconomic conditions helped to drive growth in the first half of the year. It acknowledges that lower inflation in the period in its largest markets, South Africa, Nigeria and Ghana, supported an easing of interest rates that in turn helped to alleviate the pressure on consumer spending power and business costs. Chief Financial Officer Kuhle says there's still competitive pressure for its South African market, especially on the prepaid side.
South Africa is quite a challenging market from a competitive perspective. We continue to see competitive pressure, and as you rightly point out, it is quite a mature market. South Africa's smartphone penetration is way above 80% relative to the other markets we operate in. But the consumer also, continues to be under pressure. From our perspective, we have said that, we're working on initiatives to improve, our prepaid. We're doing well on the enterprise business. In fact, we're gaining share there. But our focus is to make sure that we can turn around our prepaid segment and also, make sure that we can sustain the growth we're seeing on the postpaid side.
The group also announced changes to its leadership structure effective November 2025. The current Group Chief Risk Officer Ferdy Moolman will be replacing Charles Mcebisi as CEO and Executive Director of MTN South Africa. Yolanda Kuhle has been appointed to become Deputy CEO and Executive Director of MTN South Africa. Diabosito, SABC News, Johannesburg.